Good afternoon and welcome to our RedStone Logistics Take Out the Carbon, Take Out the Cost webinar. We're going to give folks just a couple more minutes to join and then we'll get started. Good afternoon and welcome to RedStone Logistics presentation of Take Out the Carbon, Take Out the Cost. We're really thankful that you've chosen to join us today and excited to have a robust dialogue about this important topic. A few housekeeping items before we get started. If you have questions during the presentation, please feel free to use the Q&A function at the top of your screen. We'll answer as many of those questions as we can throughout the presentation, so go ahead and ask them as we go. We'll also have additional time at the end of our presentation for further questions. And with that, I'm pleased to turn it over to our featured speaker, Duncan Hopwood.
Good afternoon, folks. Thanks for joining us. Want to take this time to make a case for sustainability in transportation management, and that the ability to improve your sustainability performance is aligned with the usual business objectives of reducing cost. And the two things are very, very closely linked. In fact, that's why we come with the, if you can take out the carbon, if you can use less fuel, you'll take out the cost of your transportation. So a little bit of background on me. I have been in third-party logistics for just over 30 years now. It feels like 10 minutes. Prior to that, I was a manufacturing engineer in the UK, focused on lean initiatives. But the last 30 years, I've been in a variety of roles looking at supply chain design, procurement, and technology. And a lot of what we have focused on in my career is building tools, building methodologies to help drive continuous improvement for customers. And today we'll explore a few of those examples as it relates to sustainability. A little bit about RedStone. If you go back one, please. Yep, RedStone Logistics. Talk about us a little bit. We're a solutions-based 3PL. We've been in business just over 14 years and servicing some complex supply chains and developing a bunch of complex solutions for them. We've been recognized for the past 5 years as one of the top 100 logistics companies in North America, and very, very focused on not just initial value to clients, but delivering continuous value throughout our relationships with the client. Okay, today's agenda, want to walk you through the case for why focus on sustainability and cost reduction, talk a little bit about some of the regulatory changes that are coming in across the globe and in North America, and then talk through a methodology for how you address the management of transportation with a focus on taking sustainability to an improved performance level. Talk about baselining that, how you can look for improvements, what they look like, and then how you quantify those benefits so you can report that out and build your business cases for it. So everybody made time for this call today, so I do want to start off with a little bit of audience participation if we can. And so we're going to put up a survey, and if you could make the comment on why sustainability is a priority for your company. I'll give everybody a minute or two just to do that. Okay, so seeing regulatory changes pop up, good business, stay ahead of everything, money and cost, I think popping up a couple of times, and interested in environmental impacts. Yeah. So I'd say the themes coming up there are recognizing the changes that come up in regulation, understanding how cost plays into it. I've got European regulations there, yep, and customers driving it. Okay, into the future. Okay. All right, so I think it lines up a little bit with the agenda, thankfully, because it is hitting the regulations, it is future changes coming in, and it is all about cost reduction that you've got to make the case for rather than just sustainability on its own. So great, thank you. I think you just clear off the screen and we'll hit the next slide, I think. So why focus on sustainability at all? I'm going to look at 4 different areas. First one, if you look at transportation, it is roughly, depending on the industry, remember, maybe 25 to 30% of the CO2 that is being emitted. If you look at most typical supply chains, you're also going to find that transportation cost is somewhere between 5 to 10% usually of the revenue of the company. So anything you can do on cost is one of the significant costs of the business. Anything you can do on sustainability, it's a significant contributor to your overall carbon footprint. So it has relevance. It's worth tackling. Second issue that's coming in is the cultural change in terms of the perception of the value for your brand on how linked you are to sustainable practices. So I think you'll read some of the statistics here, but you're seeing a shift in both consumers and Gen Z and millennials willing to pay more and having a requirement there that you're actually being sustainable. I think there's some other things that have taken place at the same time, especially a lot more of the shift to e-commerce. Some of the recent research has also said that from a transportation point of view, what consumers value the most is predictability. not so much speed. So it's that if you say you're going to deliver the product within 4 days and you keep it in 4 days, that's much more valuable than perhaps getting there in 3 days or 2 days. They want to be able to count on it, and that is a higher customer satisfaction than trying to get everything there next day, same day. If you combine these two trends together, that it gives hope for both reducing your carbon footprint and driving down your transportation costs. So, for example, especially in the parcel world and e-commerce, if you can offer the choice to a consumer to choose the lowest carbon footprint option of getting to them, but still have a good commitment on the timeline, you could shift to a cheaper mode, such as ground, to move that to the consumer, and they're still just as satisfied, but you've seriously loaded your carbon footprint. Similarly, if you're giving shipment options, can you move to a slower but lower cost mode if you're making a delivery promise? Not true for all supply chains, not true for all relationships, but at least there's an option there to leverage that. So that's okay. It's important. We've got brand value. I think the other big thing is looking at what can you do from a cost point of view. Not many people are kicking off sustainability initiatives just for the sake of them. It has to have an ROI, especially in the States, given that current regulatory environment. We'll talk about that a little bit in a minute. But if you can go ahead and reduce your carbon emissions, you're reducing your reliance on fuel. That also reduces your reliance on any fuel fluctuations. We're in a good market at the minute, but if you start to see fuel prices go up, the less you're consuming in your footprint, less open you are to those cost variations. And again, anything you can do to reduce your transportation spend or reduce your warehousing and packaging costs to support this helps. So take out costs. That's your third reason for looking at sustainability. And finally, there is a whole host of regulatory changes coming into play. There are increased carbon reporting requirements coming out both at state and national and global level. You're getting tightening of emission standards across all modes. There's kind of a global movement to push to that. And you've also got a lot more customers now, we'll talk about in a minute, as the focus shifts outside of just what is directly your own world. There's more of a shift now in supply chains for partners in the supply chain to be accountable for their own sustainability projects and emissions. Okay. So what are some of the changes? Hopefully everybody's heard of Scope 3, but if not, let me kind of give a quick refresher. So this is the universally accepted standard of how we go about reporting all of our emissions. So this is not just transportation focused. This is looking at the entire supply chain. Initially, the focus was on the direct emissions that you were causing as a company associated with everything that you own. That included private fleet, but it was really around your activities within your facilities. And then it added in to look at your energy consumption to measure that. Change that's coming is in Scope 3 is to look on a wider view of your supply chain, both downstream and upstream. So looking at all the things associated with it. I think there's 15 different categories that they're looking at within Scope 3. We're only really concerned with 2 of them, and that's Type 4, which is, they label it upstream, but to those of us in logistics look at it as inbound freight or inbound flows. So that can be your inbound and your interfacility coming into you. And then Type 9, which is your downstream or outbound freight of getting products to your customers. And so that, if you hear Scope 3 and we think about transportation, we're looking at the upstream and the downstream transportation in and out of your supply chain. So with that in mind, and that's the Scope 3 changes, what are some of the rules and legislation coming through? So first off, here in the States, we've had a need for Scope 1 and 2, but Scope 3 is only optional at the moment. So there's no federally legislated need to mandate your Scope 3 reporting. and you set a target on that. So many companies are choosing to and put that in because of pressure from either investors or from their supply chain and their partners, but not mandatory at the moment. However, there is action being taken by states, and they're trying to push forward Scope 3 on a more advanced timescale, in particular California. So California is pushing for any businesses over $1 billion that do, so not $1 billion in California, but if you're doing over $1 billion in revenue and you are doing business in California, you have to do Scope 3 reporting. And that's going to be starting just over a year's time in 2027. But you will need to be using your 2026 data for that. So you've got to prep for that. And so, as usual, you kind of see these things start a little bit at the federal level, more at the state. That's going to be progressing. Overseas, if you are a European-held company, you are starting to get hit with that. The bigger you are, the sooner you'll have to do it. They're rolling out Scope 3 in the EU, and all of their business units doing that reporting has already started, and there's a timetable, I think, through 2029 to bring everybody, including small and medium-sized businesses, into that reporting relationship. And then if you look at the rest of the world, there is, the International Standards Board, a lot of cooperation on this, but it's starting to be mandated in different parts of the world. So overall, you're seeing we believe in a fairly inevitable march towards everybody wanting this reported. And even if you may not be mandated to within your local area, as you do business and it's more interconnected and more global, the more likely. Just a quick summary slide, and I believe we'll share the presentation with everybody who attended. But it just gives you an idea of where it's mandatory, what the timing is, and the effective dates. So again, not federally mandated, but California it will be for companies over $1 billion, kicking in 12 months' time, roughly. EU, yes, it is, and there's going to be kind of waves coming out, and basically larger companies all the way to the smaller ones. And just because I'm from the UK, we've got some pending legislation over there, but not likely to affect anybody on the call, I don't think. So, yeah. Okay, so time for another quick survey, and we're going to pop up a question. Just what has your company done with Scope 3 reporting so far? Okay, all right. So rolling in, steadying out. Okay, so it looks like we're falling into 3 definite categories. So yes, we've started already and we're working on it. And then the other is no, let's wait until we've actually got the legislation to make the business case for it. And then both of us don't know at the moment, and hopefully this session will help you move towards a decision of knowing when. Okay, thank you. Okay, so we've talked about why we should be doing it in terms of the legislation. Now the question is, how do you go about doing it? And the first step is establishing a baseline of what your current transportation emissions look like. The key is you really need to have a nice, clear scope to make sure you've captured everything that is within your inbound flows and your outbound flows. That can be a little bit challenging in getting the data, but to measure it, you're really wanting shipment level detail that also at least identifies the mode and the weight used, as well as the route, origin destination zips. But ideally, if you can identify the carrier as well, because the choice of carrier can also affect your emissions profile. And then apply a standard methodology. The GHG protocol is there. That has also been adopted by the EPA through their Smart Way program here in North America. And that allows you to take that shipment data and go ahead and on a per mile or ton-mile basis, calculate for each shipment three key metrics, three key measures. We can zoom in maybe. We zoom in, Karen? I don't know if that's, or can you guys, I don't know if that was a pop-out one that was there, but no problem. Three key things. It is your CO2, which is the one we talked about, the carbon dioxide, but there is also a nitrous oxide and the PM, the particulate matter. So the bits that come out, and you're measuring all three for your ESG reporting. So part of what we do, you're seeing here, is kind of a typical emissions report we deliver to customers. We've got the transportation data automatically through TMS. We're using that to calculate at a shipment level each of those three categories, and then simplest level, you're reporting this out once a year for what was your emissions profile for that year. And then as we get to scope 3, you then break that down into your inbound and outbound. Okay. So once you've set your baseline, great, you know what you're doing, you can go year over year. One of the things you can also do is register with SmartWay, with the EPA, and become a self-reporting shipper. Logistics companies do it, carriers do it, so can shippers, and that's just another way of holding yourself accountable, because you just do an annual report, so it's not excessive, and that allows you to see how you're improving year over year and how you compare to peers. With that baseline, you're usually looking then to improve, especially if you're after costs. So giving an example here of other clients we've been working with for a while, and we've gone through a couple of different approaches. So they are when this started out, the first step of the journey, everything was moving maybe 50% truckload, 50% less than truckload. Today it is all 99% truckload, because we moved in the first stage, we moved all of the LTL to multi-stop. That improved cost and had a significant impact on their emissions profile. But we couldn't stop there. So we're going to talk about a couple of different things that we've since focused on. And so the two circles you're seeing here is really looking at their lanes, their distance profiles. And so what we wanted to focus on was the one on the left-hand side was kind of almost regional distribution, but it was hitting the West Coast and running down I-5, each of these bars on the graph are an indicator of the amount of all of their CO2 emissions for the year. Where does that particularly, where are the spikes? Where is that? So most of theirs were sitting in volume going into California, and volume moving, in this case, into the Northwest, Midwest of the states. And so that became a focus area for improvement. So again, if you've got the data, you've got the business analytics, you can use that to really hone in on where do you need to go spend your time. You don't need to boil the ocean, and have very, very specific projects. If you look out from this as well, the other thing you can look at as well is a carrier strategy. So we use multi-stop to take it down the first time by focusing on the Northeast moves and some of the stuff into California. The next piece is then your carrier strategy. So in this case, we worked with one of the key carriers here, and it's a little bit hard to see, but if you look at this as a CO2 rank in that fourth column end, this is SmartWay's carrier ranking. So carriers can commit to SmartWay, submit all of their records. It allows the carrier to be ranked on how efficient they are with their emissions, and get to a fairly accurate measure of what their emissions profile is per ton mile or per mile, depending on the mode and the carrier. In this case, a higher rank. So if you get a 1 or a 2, you're a great carrier within SmartWay. If you're a 6 or a 7, you're not doing so well. Just moving a couple of ranks in carriers can have a significant impact on your emissions profile. What that really is at its heart, what you're truly trying to drive to, is getting a carrier to use some best practices which can involve some investment, but you probably will see them, but it's the aerodynamic fittings on trailers and on the tractors, investing in low emissions engines when you're doing the fleet management. It's the lower rolling resistance tires, maintaining good tire pressure, not running idle, and being able to maybe govern the speed a little bit if you can live with that, because all of those things added together can have a significant 20-25% impact on the actual emissions of a carrier between someone who's doing those best practices and somebody who isn't. In this case, we worked with one of the core carriers for this account, and they have just invested and made changes into their sustainability practices, and that has paid off with a much better score with SmartWay, and then that has rolled on to our client in terms of their sustainability. But this was a good carrier wanted to do that, and that's helped them maintain a lot of the business. And so that was an example. Just we've got a baseline. We've identified some of the things through business analytics and dug in. These are kind of the four main categories of opportunity that you've got within transportation management. And again, you use business analytics to dig into them. So carrier strategy, we kind of just talked about. It basically comes down to either leverage your spend with your carriers to get them to change, or you've got to go out to market and find a carrier who has a better performance profile. So for example, when we're running bid events with our clients, one of the things we provide is the emissions profile of each of the carriers. And so you can take that into account together with service, together with cost when you're making your award decisions. And so it's always going to be that cost, performance, and sustainability trade-off. Second area is in load planning and optimization. So just talk through a few examples here of things that we've done. We have one client that is lucky that they have a weekly planning schedule. So today's Thursday. So the plan for next week will be set today, and we will know exactly what the initial plan is for all the orders that are planning to move next week. One of the things we noticed through the business metrics is that their capacity, the amount of the trailer space that they were using up, was averaging around about 65 to 70%. So fairly low in the way they were releasing orders, planning them, getting those in. And so we instituted a process whereby we have a planning review each week of the initial plan to identify the routes that are falling below a target capacity of 85%. We're kind of measuring that in pallet positions, just how many pallets can you get onto the trailer. And from that, we can then identify on those routes that are under capacity the specific customer locations that are eligible for adding orders to. And then we work in a review with our customer service team and look to do some order management. Sometimes that can be, most frequently, pulling some orders forward, getting the customer to agree to, and even offering an incentive for them to pull that forward and take it. Sometimes it can be pushing some orders back if there is a time to allow that, to kind of replan and get to a better capacity utilization. By doing that and putting that in place, we've had it in place for a while now, we've moved from that 65% on average to an 85 to 95% range each week. And what's the benefit of that, right? So number one, great that there is a cost reduction that is over 25% when we look at it on a cost per pallet basis. That really gets allocated back. And from an emissions point of view, it's an almost 30% reduction because you're getting those extra pallets onto the trailer. So you're essentially running less trucks to deliver the same amount of product. So that's a maximize your trailer capacity, an example of that. Looking at some of the mode shifts and planning, another example is looking at pool. So we've got a customer, again, single manufacturing point with national distribution, but they produce labels. So they've been growing their market steadily by, again, using the business analytics to identify via a heat map, were any of those markets turning into a critical mass where we could switch modes. We've identified where we can put pull points into effect. So instead of moving everything LTL, move it onto a truckload, move it into a market, last mile delivery with LTL or a local provider. That has had dramatic impact. So when I say carbon and cost coming down, cost has come down by over 33%. The emissions profile for that has actually come down by over 50%. So again, just doing the right thing and getting metrics on that, you've not only improved your cost, which everybody's always happy with, you've dramatically reduced your emissions profile for that segment of the business. Okay. The trickier one to get to is this bottom right one, is network structure. So these analyses come up and opportunities come up less frequently because you're talking about either placing a DC or a manufacturing facility in a new location, and standing that up, getting that in place is a big strategic initiative. It's a big risk. But maybe give an example. We worked with a client that was looking at improving that they had growth in a couple of regions on the East Coast, and they were looking for regional DCs and regional manufacturing. So the network design, as you could see, that it was that long length of haul, focused on an ABC of their products, focused on the A, fast-moving items, searched for evaluated two manufacturing facilities that could manufacture their fast movers, and then locate a DC next to each of them so it could be delivered into market. So by doing that work, analyzing the costs, there was a lot of parts to it, but it resulted in a 20% reduction in their transportation cost, no material change in the actual cost of production of the goods, and a 15% reduction in their emissions profile for that. So again, longer term project, more difficult analysis, but again, you could still, that was a massive impact on absolutely everything in their supply chain moving into that half of the country. And last but not least, packaging, fourth piece. So I think if everybody's shopping off Amazon, you've all seen the the thinnest bag, and trying to make that as small as possible. But again, across all modes, if you can look to use packaging to optimize your weight and dims for both the small pack, or put in place I think now there's one client we work with actually custom builds the box to the size of the order, so it minimizes that waste, minimizes the parcel cost. Other example, customer had a samples program, so they were sending everything out by LTL, reefer LTL, which was expensive on a per pallet basis, not exactly the quickest piece. But by switching to packaging that could maintain temperature through the journey, they were able to switch to faster mode. Depending on the size of the packaging, it could either move, it could move via LTL, but it was taking days off and reducing cost. And again, because you're moving via regular LTL, it was reducing your emissions process there as well. Okay. So 4 areas. We use business analytics to dive in, find out, identify proactively where these opportunities are. And then you've got to be able to quantify the benefits. And so trying to give an example here on this page. This is looking at an existing client on one of their lanes, one of their carriers, because when we looked at the carrier piece, it's kind of popping up, and you could see that the emissions profile for this carrier, that if you look on the left-hand side, they're doing just over 2 metric tons of carbon dioxide. Not doing too bad on the nitrous, and particulate matter doing okay. But when we look at the contracted carriers we also have for these lanes, there's 2 others that actually have a better score. It's a little bit hard to read on the on the screen, but what you're seeing is, hey, here's what you currently got on the left-hand side for this carrier. And if you went to a what if tool, if you went to either of these other 2 contracted carriers for these lanes, what you could take your emissions profile down to. And that is roughly, I think it's 9.99 or something, but it's 10% reduction in CO2 emissions if you wanted to switch carriers, or alternatively work with the incumbent carrier to improve their rating and improve their approach. But that's kind of the analytics that we're trying to drive down to, and you just keep chipping away, continuous improvement, small step, and report that out. Okay. So that is, if you look at, we've seen the need for regulatory compliance is coming our way. We think whether we like it or not, but it's not quite here. Got to prepare for some of it if you're doing business in California, or with Europe. There is a way to baseline if you're using GHG protocol and smart way data and tools such as the ones we have built into our TMS. You can do that reporting, you can set your baseline, understand where you are, and then use business analytics to identify where your areas of opportunity are. And we've kind of given a methodology for looking at both your carrier strategy, how you do your planning, potentially where you look at your network strategy, if that's an option, and can we look at packaging, and through a series of steps on continuous improvement projects on those, be able to drive your score down year over year. And if it makes sense, you can register with SmartWay, and that gives you your annual scorecard and your reporting for that, or that can be provided through something like our TMS data when we generate those reports. With that, I'd like to open it up for any questions.
Thanks, Duncan. As a reminder, to ask a question, please use the Q&A function at the top of your screen. You just click on that, and then you can type your question straight into the box below. Our first question, Duncan, you mentioned that data is key to getting a baseline. What are some of the challenges, the most difficult parts of getting that data, and how have you helped clients overcome it?
Okay. To do a good job on transportation, you're looking for shipment data. And so one of the challenges we see for customers is that they're having to gather that if they've not got either a good audit and payment system or a good TMS, you're kind of scrambling around to pick that off, usually from the carriers or the carrier invoices, and put that together. The way we approach it is, because we're running all the data through the TMS, we are automatically calculating. It's just a function within the flow to calculate that emissions. But the challenge usually is it's a very disparate, disconnected set of data if you've not got some centralized system you're feeding it into. And then data together, do the data entry, do the data normalization, and then you've still got to build out the functions to do the calculation.
Okay, the next question is, through the presentation, you've given examples about the cost savings that comes with the reduction in carbon. So I think 8 to 18%. Given the fact that there is real cost savings, and given the state of the market and everyone always looking to bring down their transportation costs, what do you see as the barriers? Why don't we see a greater adoption of sustainability practices, given the fact that it goes hand in glove with cost reduction?
I think everybody's after the cost reduction, but I think putting the sustainability program in place, there's kind of an administration cost to set that up. And unless there is a compelling business case to do that, or unless there is a top-down directive, I'm not seeing people just set up a sustainability process on its own without either of those two triggers. And I think that's one of the reasons legislation will help trigger that piece. But there is an admin cost, because you do have to invest in that data collection and data analysis to do the reporting. Again, anything you can do to automate that with your systems is the win. So if you collect that data, then the ability to apply all those calculation functions becomes a lot easier.
Okay, as a reminder, if you have a question, please use the Q&A function at the top of your screen. A couple more have come in. What would you recommend as a starting point? So we saw on the survey that many have said, no, they're waiting for the regulatory change. How would you recommend, what's a starting point for those that haven't yet started?
starting point, we'd call it a supply chain map, but it's really establishing the boundaries of what it is that you're going to measure. So make sure you understand all the things that are actually counted in your scope for what it is you need to measure. And that's going to then lead you to where are the data collection points for that. So for example, if I have got inbound, you're looking to measure all of your impact that you're responsible for. How are you going to collect all of that data? Similarly for outbound, what are you going to do with your third-party shipments, any return shipments, and any interfacility, and just how all of that comes together is going to be step one. And then you've got to look at what mechanism are you using to then cut. The hardest thing is the data collection. And so you've got some choices. It could be through use of a TMS, could be used through an audit and payment process, but somewhere where you can collect all of that data together in one spot. So that can be the first couple of steps before, just to be able to pull together what you need. And then you're going to need a mechanism to be able to transition that data into a metric and into measures. And so find those functions, find those calculations. And a good step for that would be either working with a logistics partner or joining somebody like SmartWay and using some of their that they've got on a per carrier basis.
Speaking of SmartWay, on the graph that you showed where you had the carrier rank from 1 to 6 in the emissions, are those driven off of, does that assume that all those carriers have been SmartWay registered? Or if they aren't SmartWay registered, will they still have a carrier rank?
So in the methodology we use, we match to the MC, to the carrier's unique identifier. And if they are SmartWay registered, we use their profile from SmartWay. If they are not SmartWay registered, there's a 1 through 7 ranking, but we assume a ranking 6 if it is a non-SmartWay carrier. Again, if you're looking for improvements and you've got a bunch of non-registered carriers, one of the activities you could take is get those carriers to register, and that can improve the score just from that, because they may be doing things that just aren't measured. But if you get them to register, you've got validity to changing that metric.
Great point. Our next question says, after an organization establishes its baseline and achieves reductions over the first few years, can they continue working through these strategies for continued improvement beyond the initial wins? So sort of, how do you think about road mapping of sustainability improvements?
Yep, some of these strategies only come around periodically, and so I think in the couple of examples I gave you, where we started out at the beginning is nowhere near where we are, still trying to drive some continuous improvement. So a couple of things change. Your distribution patterns can change. You end up, for example, the label company, that their market grew, and therefore their solution, we'd have to adapt to it and grow with that. Carriers change, and so as you go through procurement events, you can tune into that. And then I've not seen many stable, I don't know about you guys, I've not seen many stable supply chains. Most supply chains do not remain the same over a 5-year period. You're having to constantly evolve and adapt and identify those opportunities in each one of them. A lot can come through the planning, a lot can come through the lane management.
So it sounds like you have to remain flexible. You may start with a roadmap, but you may have to actually revisit that roadmap every year to account for changes in your core business that may have picked up another location or changed inputs or added a new product line, et cetera. You may have to actually retool the strategies you're going to use based on business changes. Is that right?
Yep. And I'm thinking of a couple of examples that we're using. One is looking at I mentioned the heat map, but looking at distribution patterns for that planning opportunity to see where you could get to a modal shift. Another is monitoring each of the lanes to see not just financial performance and carrier on time performance, but you're also looking at the emissions performance and see if you can fine tune any of that as you go, again, as demands fluctuate across each individual lane. So it's continual monitoring to identify those opportunities. It's a death march, it never ends, right? So
for sure. And our final question so far, again, if you have questions, please feel free and drop them in the Q&A. When you speak about changing carriers in order to improve your score, How do you apply differences in cost from one carrier to another?
So that's I mentioned earlier, as we do procurement, for us, as we do procurement events, part of what you're balancing out is not just the cost comparison, but also the emissions and the service comparison between carriers. So you can make a balanced decision there. But also, if you're working with carriers, it's a little bit counterintuitive, but it's like if they are making good progress on fuel efficiency, they are usually becoming more efficient operators and can be more price competitive. I mean, if you can get a 20% reduction in your fuel consumption of your competition as a carrier, you've got room to play with in the competitiveness of your rate. So we have not seen a case yet where we've had to trade off, hey, take an increase in cost just so I could have a better. The two things do seem to align quite nicely.
That's great. All right, it looks like that's all of the questions that we have. I want to, Duncan, thank you for sharing your expertise today, and thanks to everyone who took the time out of their day to join the call and learn a little bit more about cutting carbon and cutting costs. If you have additional questions, please feel free to reach out to us at our website. Thank you so much for joining.
Thank you.